Welcome to Mormon Land, a podcast where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack, coming to you with a special episode of our podcast from Hamburg, Germany. Born in West Germany, Ralf Grünke has been a member of the church for most of his life. Among his Catholic and Lutheran peers, though, that meant he keenly felt his, quote, otherness. But being, quote, an ugly duckling between the swans, quote, Grunke has written, was a blessing in disguise. He studied his own faith deeply, reading everything he could find, pro or con, as well as other faiths, and has developed a strong foundation both spiritually and scholarly. Grunke is now the church's assistant communications director for Central Europe, headquartered in Frankfurt. He joined me today for a conversation here in Hamburg. Okay, let's start with, how did you become a member of the church?
I was introduced to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by my parents, who joined the church when I was only 5 years old. I was still Christian Lutheran, but my family's history and relation to Latter-day Saints goes further back. My grandmother joined the church in December of 1951 and raised her two younger children, my aunt, my uncle in the gospel. My dad took a little longer to make up his mind. So on the one hand, I'm born Protestant, and you could call myself a convert. On the other hand, I'm a third generation Latter-day Saint.
Was your grandmother German?
She was an ethnic German. She was born in Warsaw. I believe she considered herself Polish. She spoke Polish and a little Russian. And then towards the end of World War II was forced to leave Poland to go to Germany because of her German nationality and her German passport, her German name. So that's how she ended up in Germany.
So what was it like growing up? You described in the essay you wrote about your otherness. What was it like being a Latter-day Saint among mostly Catholics and Lutherans?
Well, the feeling of otherness was an acquired experience. I didn't think much of it. I enjoyed attending church with my parents, with other relatives and friends. But in the essay you referred to, I recall the conversation I had with my best buddy in elementary school when he asked me, so are you Catholic or Protestant? Because in his mind, that's the only thing that existed at the time. And I told him that I belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it was a Christian faith of its own. And he just argued that couldn't be because there were only those two options. I think that was the first time that I noticed that in the perception of others, you couldn't possibly be something other than Catholic and Protestant. The religious landscape has changed significantly today. So little boys and girls today grow up having Muslim friends or having friends of other faiths. I think the conversation wouldn't take place as it did when I was 6 or 7. But then continuing, I noticed that in many ways I could relate to my peers. When I eventually withdrew my membership from the Protestant church, my religion instructor, and in Germany, religion is a subject taught at public schools by representatives of different faiths. He invited me back to my class and did all he possibly could to discredit me in front of my classmates, which again I noticed was creating a feeling of otherness. By the way, I think that's a fairly untypical experience. It was just a few encounters I had. Now I feel deeply connected to the community. I'm heavily involved in interfaith affairs. And I've noticed that there's so much that we have in common with other good-willed individuals of any faith.
Mormon Land will be right back.
You can support Mormon Land by going to patreon.com/MormonLand to make a donation. There you can access transcripts to our podcast. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/MormonLand. You also can keep up with the latest happenings in and about the church via our newsletter. Just sign up at sltrib.com/Mormon-land.
When did you feel your own faith foundation was built, really?
I think it was around the age of 14 when I decided that this Latter-day Saint story needed to be my own, or I wanted no part of it if it was so objectable to others. Back then, I'm in my early 50s, the internet was not an option, so I went to the local library and checked out all the books I could. They actually did have an impressive collection of literature, very critical of the church. And then, of course, I had what my parents had on their bookshelves. And I thought things through and sought after spiritual confirmations, but it was also the example of a few members, particularly members of my family. I mentioned my grandmother that prompted me to pursue this path.
So what did you study in college and where did you go?
I studied political science. It was clear to me very early on that that's what I wanted to do. After my original plans of becoming a circus ringmaster didn't pan out, I wanted to become a political journalist. And your career path to journalism in Germany is slightly different from what I understand it to be in the United States. In the United States, you could go to some school of journalism. Here, most media organizations, most outlets prefer graduates in political science or economics or whatever, and then take the attitude, we'll teach them how to write articles, but you come with some competence in whatever field it is. So it was fairly clear to me from the age of about 16 or 17 that I would become a political journalist. So I started studying at Bamberg University, then eventually, because of private matters, transferred to BYU, where I graduated with my undergraduate degree and then continued with advanced degrees back in Germany.
Did you serve a Latter-day Saint mission?
I did. I did serve 2 years in the West Midlands of England. At the time of returning, felt like I was half an Englishman, very much identified with the people there, great, deep religious experience to me, of course, primarily. And I remember shortly before my mission, I mentioned the example of my grandmother. I think that was one of the moments when I thought that I needed to hold on to this story and to the heritage of my grandmother. She suffered of various kinds of cancers. She was very ill towards the end of her life. And she reached one point when it was clear that she only had a few days to live. And the whole family gathered around her and everyone had a one-on-one with Oma, with grandma. And when I walked in and she spoke German with a heavy Polish accent until she took her last breath, she knew that I was considering to turn in my mission papers. And she told me with her Polish accent, if you go to Poland on your mission, I will whisper Polish words in your ear. Unfortunately, she didn't speak any English, but she was so hopeful, and she talked about how hopefully on the day of her funeral it would be a sunny, pleasant day, because she didn't want people to be out there on the graveyard in the rain or with cloudy skies. She was just so much at peace with herself and with the world that I thought, if that faith gives her that type of feeling and confidence, I want to die like my grandmother. And I'm sure that's not the only faith. I know people of other faiths who also find much strength and confidence and peace in what they believe in. But I wanted something like that.
So let's move into the present. What do you do for the LDS Church?
About 19 years ago, I got a phone call. I was recruited for a position in what was then called the Public Affairs Department of the Church of Jesus Christ. For the last few years, it's been the Church Communication Department. I'm the Assistant Area Director in the Europe Central area. What we do, a lot of what we do is to support, provide guidance, professional support, materials, respond to questions from national communication directors, which is a calling, people who represent the church and communicate on behalf of the church in various countries. Personally, I also serve as the church's liaison to the national media. I do have the opportunity to give lectures at universities, to represent the church when engaging with government leaders, and something that's very close to my heart that I engaged with both on a professional basis, but also spending lots of hours on a volunteer basis is interfaith efforts. I believe that if we want to have peaceful societies, we need to start talking to each other and try to understand each other better and see where people are coming from and find places where we can join together.
What countries are included in Central Europe for your
the Europe Central? The Europe Central area covers 37 countries. That sounds like a lot. There are lots of microstates, tiny little countries. In our area, some of those are Luxembourg or Liechtenstein or Monaco. But the larger countries in the Europe Central area are Spain, France, Germany, Poland, Switzerland, Austria. And many others, not including the Nordic countries, which are covered by a different area of the church. But we do get around, and it's so much fun to deal with cultural diversity, and it's so much of a headache to deal with the cultural diversity all at the same time. But it's a blessing. I love my job, really. If I was financially independent, I would probably volunteer to do what I do. I hope that my boss is not listening to me. I still need a salary because I don't know how to farm.
How has the church in Europe changed in your lifetime, these decades?
The church has matured in many ways. Today, if you attend any of our meetings, visit our congregations and ask how long people have been in the church, you'll find plenty of people who have been church members in the second, third, fourth, fifth generation. And at the same time, our congregations have become a lot more diverse culturally, which is also an enriching experience. We have people from all over the world join in faith and join in our services, which is something beautiful. Also, in society has changed, has responded to the fact that our religious landscape has become more diverse. So there is a lot more interfaith respect and engagement with each other. In the past, I think it's a two-way process and a two-way road. I think Latter-day Saints today are a lot more open to engage with and join in interfaith roundtables than they were 30 or 40 years ago. And we are embraced more by friends of other faiths.
So speaking of that, how is the church perceived in Europe? I think it was once kind of seen as a cult, but certainly a small minority. How is it perceived today?
Well, in most European countries, we are a small minority, so most people have never heard of us. Dealing with and interacting with reporters, with the news media on a regular basis, I've noticed that it's a generational thing. When I talk to reporters my age and above, they often have certain ideas they've heard of and certain expectations towards Latter-day Saints, and maybe some ideas of that you were referring to. If I talk to young reporters, I don't want to badmouth wonderful, talented, gifted young media people, but religion is not on their minds. So in other words, they know close to nothing about Latter-day Saints. They may have had a friend in high school, or they may have run into missionaries somewhere downtown, But there, it's not so much combating prejudice; it's providing basic facts and educating.
So has the move to not use the term Mormon, do you think that's helped the perception in Europe?
Well, it certainly helped us online. I've noticed that if you use search engines in most European languages and you just type in Jesus Christ, the church sites, the sites of the Church of Jesus Christ will often be among the top hits. And generally speaking, most people have either not heard of us or know very little about us. It seems like being the liaison to national media, still after 2 decades, in many cases, my job still is to let people know that we are here. And the most common response I receive from media representatives is surprise. They say, well, I've heard of Mormons, but I thought they were somewhere in the United States. And I explain to them the history, the nature of the church, that we have roots here in Germany, educate them about the name of the church. So generally speaking, that was a very long-winded response, I'm sorry. I think generally speaking, it has helped because it emphasizes our connection to the Christian faith.
So what kind of questions do you get from the media? Just give me a little spectrum of questions.
Okay, well, most reporters ask, those are very basic. What do you believe in? Are you Christian? How many members do you have? How does your day-to-day experience, faith experience, differ from those of Protestants or Catholics or Muslims or Jews? And then, of course, people ask about our scriptural canon. They may have heard of the Book of Mormon, but have never read it. They want to know about that. Those are most of the questions. And then we receive many questions about our missionaries. They're visible, they're out there in the streets. Many people are familiar with the image of young people wearing black name tags, even though today you can't pick them out as quickly because they may not be wearing a tie and a blue shirt. But then once you see the name tag, you can make the connection.
You spoke about how the congregations are growing more diverse. What percentage of new members are immigrants, would you say? You don't have to give me an exact figure, but in general, are more immigrants joining than Germans, for example?
I think that would be a fairly safe bet. My wife and I recently invited our sister missionaries, those assigned to our ward, to our home to have dinner, and we talked about their German skills, and they are asking some of the members of our board to assist them in practicing their German pronunciation, and they both agreed that they had never taught a German. Of course, they approach Germans out in the street or wherever they may meet them, but in their cases, those who have agreed to sit down with them and take missionary lessons, all of them were immigrants, and I wholeheartedly support people of all backgrounds. I'm just thinking of my own grandmother. I mentioned that she came to Germany, and I don't know if there were any church members who were hesitant to embrace her fully because she could hardly speak any German. But as a matter of fact, I know that there were members who went out of their way, very literally. There are some amazing experiences that I heard about to include her, and I want to be one of those who do that as well.
Do you think it's created some tensions, though, in some of these little wards between really long-time German members and the new members who might be from Africa? They might have been Muslims. Any tensions there?
Well, I know that it sometimes takes time getting used to. Africans often have different habits of how much excitement and enthusiasm they apply when they express their religious faith. you're visiting Germany, you notice how Germans express themselves. So sometimes it takes a little patience dealing with each other, talking to each other. But I think the task the Savior has given us is to view each other as brothers and sisters and to reach out. Let me just give you an example of what helped my grandmother to stay in the church. So she was found by missionaries and taught and lived in a tiny little farming community by the name of Lam, which translates as lame. Fairly good description of the social life in that village. The closest congregation was about 25 kilometers away. I can't even tell you how many miles those are. She had home teachers who faithfully visited her. And this sounds like a joke, but it's actually what happened. The two home teachers that regularly rode their bicycles out there because they didn't have a car were a guy with a wooden leg and a blind guy. And they rode their bikes out there on a regular basis. The guy with the wooden leg would sing or talk the entire time while they were riding their bicycles out to Lame, so that the blind guy would know where to go. And I remember my brother and I met one of them when we were teenagers or young men. And he said, I remember visiting you out in Lame on my bike, and we had to tell him that we're so grateful, deeply grateful you visited our father and his mother. But very fortunately, today ways of communication are more readily available. But yeah, it's a matter of reaching out, and it wasn't just about helping or making sure that a young single mother, her husband had died in the war, so had her father and her brother, would stay faithful and be part of the fold, but she desperately needed someone to listen to and to sustain and to support her. And just as much as I'm thankful to people who have supported my family, I wanted to open my home and be supportive to those who also are in need of support.
So you have been described as, quote, a sensible, peaceful Christian without exclusivist behavior. And also what he tells about himself and his faith sparks brotherly respect. Yet the LDS Church does make some exclusive truth claims. How do you deal with that while trying to work in these interfaith circles?
Yeah, the quote you just stated came from an old Catholic friend of mine, Catholic blogger. We are good friends. Well, it's tricky sometimes. It's standing firm in your own convictions, but also at the same time understanding that, as Orson Whitney said, that the Latter-day Saints are not the only people that are involved in doing the Lord's work, because it's too grand, there's too much to do. And it's so easy for me to acknowledge when I deal with my Muslim, my Jewish, and also, of course, with my Christian friends, that what they do is a blessing in people's lives. And the world's so much in need of love and of hope that we couldn't possibly assume that we, as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, are the only ones who can contribute or can do that.
So what kinds of things do you do when you're wearing that interfaith hat? What other things do you do besides representing the church? You were telling us some of that earlier.
What do I do in my interfaith work other than representing the church?
Yes.
Well, I've been involved recently in a project where our local interfaith roundtable, and this is not part of my professional work, but part of my local volunteer work, we put together an interfaith calendar, because it's sometimes difficult to keep track of all the religious holidays our friends of other faiths celebrate, and we want to congratulate them. That's something that has changed, I've noticed, at least in Germany. It's very common to send greetings and good wishes of people of other faiths. I get so many Christmas cards from Muslim friends and from Jewish friends every year, and I send out a whole bunch of Ramadan cards, and got some very friendly responses back, or Hanukkah cards, or Jewish New Year's cards. My Baha'i friends, they never cease to celebrate. There's so many Baha'i holidays.
Well, Hindu, oh my gosh.
Yes, true, yeah. So that's a project I've been involved with. I just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, directed a local committee that organized the second statewide convention of interfaith roundtables. That took some work to put that together. We met at a local mosque, by the way, a local Ahmadiyya mosque, also a movement that sometimes has its challenges within the larger Muslim world. At times very similar to what we experience in Christian circles, and had met with members of state parliament who elaborated on the state government's intention to foster interfaith relations and interfaith dialogue. So most of it is focused on fostering dialogue, respect. I've helped organize a few interfaith festivals where we sing and dance and eat and talk together. And of course, there are interfaith efforts to improve and help the community in many ways.
Have you been involved in politics at all?
Me personally, I have. Of course, that is very separate from what I do for the church, because the church is politically neutral. But I have been involved in community affairs and community efforts. I've served one term on a city council, and I'm involved in various initiatives to improve the community. Especially
environmental concerns?
Yes, I've been active in various sustainability and environmental initiatives that all began with a nuclear disaster in Chernobyl on April 26, 1986. I was at the age of 14, and I think the first thing I did in the community was to start a local initiative to save a local field and playground from being replaced with parking garages. So I wasn't very happy with that. That's where I spent my afternoons playing soccer. So I got together with some adult neighbors, and we said, we need to stop that investor from doing that. And there were about 3 or 4 of us. So we put together flyers, and then we received the first media interview. And all the adults said, let's have Ralf be our spokesperson. So it was at the age of 14 that I gave my first media interview to local radio, explaining why we needed that field and that playground more than parking garages. And it just went on from there. I, just a few years ago, started a local think tank on sustainable city planning, and continue to serve where I'm needed.
So what do you want our Utah and American listeners to know about the church that I haven't asked you?
Understand that the church is alive and well, and that there are so many faithful stories to be told. Tell them that we are very, very grateful to all the missionaries they send. I know that there are so many missionaries and missionary couples coming from Utah, and we are deeply grateful for their service and for the strength of the church in Utah. But be assured that we are doing whatever we can to add to the strength of the church and to share and establish a message of peace and hope and love, so much needed in today's world, in my opinion.
What do you see as the church's future in Europe? What are your hopes and dreams for the church's future in Europe?
I noticed that, very fortunately, there are still very many young people in the church. I had an interesting experience, and I'm thinking about whether it would be appropriate to share right now. I serve as high counselor in my local stake, and I was just sent to give a talk at my assigned board last Sunday. And as I was sitting on the stand during the sacrament, I looked into the congregation, and I experienced somewhat of what I would describe as a personal Pentecost experience. I felt an outpouring of the Spirit, and I could just visually note that Heavenly Father has so much love and is so willing to bless every single member of their congregation, wherever they may come from, whatever their situation may be, however weak or strong their faith would be. And I just walked out with a very strong feeling that the Lord has good intentions for the church in Europe. And if we continue to be able to help people from all walks of life, and particularly people moving to Germany from other places, and our young people, then I think there's so much that small church as we are, and probably will continue to be for a while, has to offer to local communities, to build bridges, to be empathetic to people who need empathy and who may be standing on the sidelines of society today.
Thanks for speaking with me today. We remind our listeners that they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next week.